she was never supposed to speak. In the private accounting suite on the 42nd floor of the Sovereign, Celia Huang's only job was to reconcile the numbers, keep her head down, and finish the quarterly audit before dawn. She was a contractor, nobody's employee, nobody's confidant, a woman with a laptop, a stack of general ledgers, and a cold cup of coffee that had stopped being worth drinking 40 minutes ago. She was supposed to be invisible. But when her phone lit up at 11:47 p.m. with a call from her mother, Celia made a mistake she couldn't undo. She answered in rapid, furious Cantonese. She didn't know that the most feared man in Las Vegas was standing 8 feet away on the other side of a half-open door, listening to every single word. 2 hours later, in the marble stillness of a private elevator bank, she heard something that changed everything. Don't let her leave. The Sovereign was not the kind of casino that appeared in travel blogs. It did not have a loyalty points program or a buffet or a guy in a foam cowboy hat wandering the slots at 2 a.m. The Sovereign was members only, invitation only, a glass and marble tower on the far end of the strip where the elevators required a biometric scan, and the chips on the gaming floor started at $10,000. It was, by every official measure, a monument to legitimate luxury. Celia knew better. She had been in forensic accounting long enough to understand that the cleanest balance sheets were usually hiding the dirtiest money. The Sovereign's parent company, Jade Meridian Holdings, had retained her firm after a mid-tier bank flagged an anomaly in the casino's quarterly deposits, a $4.2 million discrepancy, not sloppy enough to be an accident, not clean enough to be intentional fraud, exactly the kind of gray zone that made Celia's brain light up like a switchboard. She had arrived at the casino at 9 p.m., been escorted to the private suite on the 42nd floor by a silent man in a dark suit, and had been left entirely alone with 12 months of financial records and a view of the strip that would have been breathtaking if she had looked up long enough to appreciate it. Celia did not look up. She looked at the numbers. At 29, Celia Huang was the youngest senior forensic accountant her firm had ever promoted. She was also, as she had been reminded, in various polite and impolite ways throughout her career, not what people expected when they opened the door for the senior forensic accountant. She was short. She was round, with wide hips and heavy arms, and a soft belly that pressed against the waistband of her slacks in a way that no amount of well-cut blazers fully disguised. She wore her black hair pulled back in a bun that grew progressively messier as the night wore on. She had reading glasses that she shoved on top of her head when she wasn't using them, and that she was constantly forgetting were there. She did not look like a woman who could dismantle a financial cover-up in 6 hours. That was, historically, her greatest professional advantage. By 11:30 p.m., she had already found something wrong. Not the discrepancy itself. That was the obvious thing, the thing the bank had flagged, the thing she'd been hired to explain. What Celia had found was something underneath it. A pattern in the food and beverage vendor accounts, small irregularities, slightly off-cycle payments to a supplier named Agate Pacific Distribution that didn't match any of the casino's other vendor rhythms. Agate Pacific had a Hong Kong business registration number. It had been receiving between $80,000 and $120,000 a month for 18 months, and it did not appear in a single shipping manifest in the casino's receiving logs. Celia pulled up the state business registration database in a new tab and searched for Agate Pacific Distribution. It didn't exist. She leaned back in her chair, chewing the end of her pen, staring at the screen. Before she could pull the next thread, her phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at the screen. Mum. Celia had a rule about not taking personal calls on a client site. She had a rule about keeping her phone on silent during work hours. She had a rule about a lot of things, most of which she consistently violated when her mother was involved. She answered, pressing the phone to her ear. Ma, she said, in Cantonese, her voice dropping instinctively to the fast, flattened dialect of her parents' village outside Guangzhou. The same dialect that had filled her childhood home in Flushing, Queens, that had been hollowed across the cramped kitchen of her parents' restaurant for 20 years. "It's almost midnight. What happened?" Her mother spoke in a breathless rush. Grandmother had fallen, the hospital in Queens. Her aunt was being impossible about the insurance forms. Could Celia come home? "I can't come home tonight, I'm in Las Vegas," Celia said, her voice sharpening. "Tell Auntie Bao to stop hovering and let the nurses do their job. Grandmother is fine. She fell last month and she was running a mahjong table 3 days later." Her mother made an aggrieved noise and launched into a detailed complaint about Auntie Bao's general personality. "Ma," Celia pressed 2 fingers to her forehead. "Ma, listen to me. I will call the hospital first thing in the morning. You need to go home and sleep. Tell Bao that if she wants to be useful, she can fill out the insurance forms instead of standing in the hallway crying about them. And for the love of..." She dropped into a Cantonese phrase she had learned from her grandmother, a particularly pungent expression that grandmother reserved for incompetent bureaucrats and bad drivers. "Just handle it, okay? I'll call you at 7. She hung up. The silence in the room was different from the silence before she had answered. Celia turned around. The door to the adjacent lounge, the door she had registered as closed when she arrived, was open, not wide open, cracked perhaps 6 inches, which was apparently enough. Standing in the gap of that doorway, absolutely motionless, was a man. He was tall, lean, and dressed in a dark suit that had the particular expensive quality of being completely unadorned. No tie. The first button of his shirt undone, he had sharp, angular features and dark hair cut close at the sides, and he was watching her with an expression that was entirely, terrifyingly neutral. Not angry, not amused. Simply present, with the total focused attention of a man who made consequential decisions for a living and was currently deciding something consequential about her. Behind him, partially visible through the open door, were several other men seated around a table. They had all stopped talking. They were all looking at the doorway. Celia's heart performed a deeply unpleasant maneuver against her ribcage. She recognized the man. She had done her background research before accepting the engagement. Raphael Tsang, 51 years old. Born in Hong Kong, educated in London, arrived in Las Vegas in 2004 with a real estate portfolio worth $200 million and an extremely private history that no journalist had ever successfully investigated. He owned Jade Meridian Holdings outright. He owned the Sovereign outright. He was, technically, her client. He was also, according to certain federal documents she had no official access to, and had read anyway, rumored to control the movement of significant amounts of money through channels that did not appear on any filing with the Nevada Gaming Control Board. She had been told he was in Singapore this week. His assistant had confirmed it. "Miss Huang," Raphael Tsang said in English, his voice low and precisely calibrated, "you speak Cantonese." It was not a question. Celia set her phone on the desk. She kept her voice even. "I grew up in Flushing. My parents are from Guangdong." Guangdong. Something shifted in his expression, barely a fractional adjustment, like a lens refocusing. "Which part?" "Kaiping," she said. "Why does that matter?" "Because you weren't speaking Mandarin," he said. "You were speaking the Taishan variant. My grandmother spoke it." He paused. "You've been sitting in that room for 2 hours." Celia calculated, rapidly, what she had, and had not heard through the door before she had picked up the phone. It had been muffled. She had registered voices, but had not been paying attention to the language. She had been focused on agate Pacific distribution, but she understood, with the cold precision that was her professional gift, exactly what it meant that Raphael Tsang was standing in that doorway with that expression on his face. "I heard you say that $4.2 million is missing," she said. She watched his face carefully, and that someone inside the organization created the discrepancy deliberately, made it look like a gaming floor problem, and that you have 48 hours before it escalates to a federal review. One of the men in the lounge behind Raphael made a sharp movement. Raphael held up one hand, a minimal gesture, and the movement stopped. "And what did you do with that information?" he asked. "I went back to the balance sheet," Celia said. She turned her laptop slightly toward the doorway. The Agate Pacific records were still open on the screen, because I had already found something that has nothing to do with the gaming floor. The silence held for a long moment. Then Raphael Tsang stepped fully into the accounting suite and walked to stand behind her chair. He looked at the screen. He smelled of bergamot and something colder, like air off open water. He was close enough that she could feel the focused weight of his attention, the way some men occupied a room simply by existing in it. Celia did not move. She pointed at the screen. "Agate Pacific Distribution," she said. 18 months of payments, between $80,000 and $120,000 per month. No shipping manifests, no delivery records, no corresponding inventory entries anywhere in the casino's receiving logs. She paused. "The company doesn't exist. Someone at the executive level of your organization has been routing money to a shell company they created themselves. That's where most of the $4.2 million went." Raphael was quiet. He was reading. She could feel the precise quality of his concentration shift, from assessing her to actually working through what she was showing him. "The flagged discrepancy," he said finally, "the one that triggered the external audit." "Set deliberately," Celia said. "The pattern is too clean to be an accident and too artful to be simple theft. Someone who understands forensic accounting created this, designed it to look suspicious in exactly the right way, to bring in an outside auditor, to trigger federal scrutiny." She let that sit for a moment, and to focus everyone's attention on the gaming floor while nobody looked at the F&B vendor accounts. "You found this in 2 hours," he said. "I found the entry point in 2 hours," she said. "I haven't finished pulling the thread." He looked at her then, not at the screen, at her. The neutral assessment was still there, but something had replaced its center. Not warmth exactly, but something that was closer to the expression of a man who has been handed an instrument he didn't know he needed and is genuinely trying to understand how it works. "Finish pulling it," he said. She worked until 4:30 in the morning. Raphael's men brought coffee, real coffee, and then disappeared. Raphael himself stayed. He didn't hover. He sat on the opposite side of the table with his own phone, and occasionally Celia looked up to find his eyes already on her, and she looked back at the screen and kept working. The thread led, as she had suspected, to Martin Chu. Martin Chu was the CFO of Jade Meridian Holdings, 6 years in the role. In that time, he had built a meticulous parallel structure in the books, a series of shell companies, each feeding into the next, the final recipient being a holding entity in the Cayman Islands linked, through 3 layers of intermediaries, to a property purchase in Vancouver registered in his wife's maiden name. $4.2 million total, extracted in careful increments across 18 months, hidden behind a ghost vendor and a deliberately triggered audit designed to keep Raphael Tsang looking the wrong direction. "Martin scheduled the external engagement through your assistant," Celia said at 4:15. "He told her you'd authorized it. Your assistant confirmed the engagement with my firm directly, so she had no reason to question the instruction." She paused. "He also drafted the letter to the bank himself, filed it in your name." Raphael had gone very still. "He's scheduled to meet with me tomorrow at 10, Celia said, "to receive my preliminary findings." She closed her laptop. Her hands were steady. She was not certain how, given that she had been awake for 20 hours and was sitting in a room with several men whose complete history she preferred not to think about. "I'd like to keep that meeting." Raphael looked at her. "I'll present him with a version of my findings," she said. "Clean, accurate, with one deliberate error, a small discrepancy in the F&B reconciliation, wrong by a specific dollar amount. If he corrects it in the room, he'll have to reveal exactly how he knows where that number comes from." She let the logic breathe for a moment. He won't be able to stop himself. People who steal money spend more time managing it in their heads than the people it belongs to. A long silence. You want to walk back into this building in the morning, Raphael said, after spending the night finding evidence that implicates my CFO in a $4 million theft, and sit across from him at a conference table. I want to finish the job, Celia said. He studied her. The city lights through the windows cast the room in low, ambient gold. His face was all sharp planes and control in that light, unreadable in the way that was probably a professional asset in every room he occupied. You are not what I expected, he said quietly. Celia looked at her cold coffee, decided it was undrinkable, and set it back down. Nobody ever is, she said. That's usually the point. Something moved at the very edge of his expression. It was gone before she could name it. Go, he said. He stood. Kenny will take you to a room. You'll stay here tonight. I have a hotel. You have found information that Martin Chu would very much prefer remain unfound, Raphael said evenly. Until tomorrow's meeting is finished, you stay here. He picked up his jacket. It is not a request, but it is for your safety, not mine. She weighed that. She was too exhausted to argue with clean logic, and she was also, though she would not have admitted it under most circumstances, not entirely unhappy with the arrangement. I want a room with a good shower, she said, and I need the F&B ledgers pulled for a 3-year look-back on my desks by 8 a.m. The edge of his mouth moved, just barely. I'll see what we can do, he said. The meeting with Martin Chu began at 10:02 a.m. The conference room on the 38th floor had a table that probably cost more than Celia's apartment, and the kind of air conditioning that felt like the building was actively discouraging human presence. Martin Chu was already seated when Celia arrived. A compact, precise man in his mid-50s, with the manner of someone who had long ago decided that meticulous presentation was indistinguishable from integrity. He stood when she entered, smiled, shook her hand. Miss Huang, I've heard excellent things about your firm. Thank you, Celia said, sitting across from him. She set her laptop on the table, a stack of printouts beside it, and opened to the first page of her preliminary report. I appreciate you making time. The report was clean, professional, carefully, deliberately wrong in exactly one place. She walked him through it methodically. Gaming floor reconciliation, clean. Hotel and spa revenues, clean. Tax reporting, clean. She arrived at the food and beverage section and laid the page in front of him. I did find one area that needs clarification, she said, keeping her voice pleasantly neutral. She pointed to a line in the F&B reconciliation. There's a recurring variance in the vendor account section. I've been attributing it to the Agate Pacific line items, but the number I'm getting doesn't quite balance. She showed him the total. It was wrong by exactly $214,000, the amount of a single disbursement from March of the previous year. A disbursement she had in reality already fully documented and traced to the Vancouver property purchase. Martin Chu looked at the number. She watched him. She watched the small muscles around his eyes tighten. She watched him glance at the page once, then a second time, and she knew the instant he found the error. Not because his face changed dramatically, but because the quality of his stillness changed. He had been relaxed. Now he was performing relaxed, and there was a difference between those two things that she had learned to read before she was old enough to drive. This figure here, he said, pointing, the March disbursement. That's slightly off. The correct number should be. He caught himself, almost. But he said it anyway, because he had been managing these numbers in his head for 18 months, and the wrong figure sitting on the page in front of him was an itch he could not leave alone. He gave her the exact amount. The exact amount that matched the Agate Pacific wire record she had printed at 7 a.m. and cross-referenced against the Vancouver property deed. I see, Celia said. That's very helpful, thank you. Can you walk me through which account that ties back to? The silence in the room became a different kind of silence. Martin Chu looked at her across the polished table, and the expression on his face, when his professional composure finally ran out of runway, was not anger. It was the expression of a man who has understood, too late, that he has been outplayed by someone he dismissed on sight, by the round woman with the messy bun and the reading glasses perpetually lost on top of her head, whom he had greeted with the particular bright-eyed warmth men reserve for people they do not consider a threat. The door to the conference room opened. Raphael Tsang walked in. He was followed by two men Celia recognized from the previous night. He did not look at Martin. He looked at Celia. She gave him a minimal nod, the one they had agreed on. Martin Chu stood up very quickly and said nothing at all, because there was nothing useful left to say. "Martin," Raphael said, finally turning to the CFO. His voice was entirely calm, the way deep water is calm. "I think we should move this conversation somewhere more private." By noon, Celia was sitting in Raphael Tsang's private office on the top floor of the Sovereign, with a view of the Nevada desert stretching to the edge of the visible world. A real lunch. Eggs and congee that someone had sourced from a Cantonese restaurant on Spring Mountain Road, and the particular hollow feeling that follows a long night and a high-stakes morning. She had put on fresh clothes. She had slept for 4 hours. She was still wearing the same reading glasses, still shoved on top of her head, still forgotten. Raphael sat across from her. He had shed his jacket. He looked, for the first time since she had seen him in the doorway the night before, like a man not running at full performing capacity. "The funds," Celia said. "Most of it is traceable. The Vancouver property is in a recoverable jurisdiction. Your attorneys." "I know what my attorneys can do," he said. "Then why are you looking at me like that?" "Because," Raphael said, setting down his coffee, "you found in 6 hours what my internal team spent 3 months not finding, and then you designed a trap for the man who built the entire scheme and walked into that room to spring it yourself." "I wasn't alone," Celia said. "You were outside the door." "You didn't know I would be outside the door." She considered that. "I knew you'd be somewhere nearby," she said. "You don't strike me as a man who lets important things happen outside his line of sight." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a plane banked low and slow over the desert in the clean morning light. "You grew up in Flushing," he said. "Your parents ran a restaurant." 22 years, Cantonese dim sum mostly. I spent every weekend doing homework in the supply room because they couldn't afford after-school programs. She ate a spoonful of congee. It was good. Real ginger, real stock, nothing from a can. I learned to read financial records because my dad's bookkeeper was skimming from the register, and nobody could figure out why the till was always short. I was 15. I did the math on a napkin and showed my dad where the money was going. He was furious that I'd gone through the records, she added. Then he was furious at the bookkeeper. Then he hired me to do the books every month. 15 years old, Raphael said. "Numbers don't lie," Celia said. "People do. But the numbers always show you where the lie is if you know what to look for." Raphael looked at her steadily. In the daylight, his expression was still not easy to read, but it had a quality she hadn't seen in it during the long night. Not the weighing and assessing quality, not the calculating watchfulness, something more immediate. Something that looked, she thought, like recognition. "The arrangement my company has with your firm," he said, "is for a single engagement, this audit." "That's correct." "I'd like to propose a different arrangement." He set his cup down on the marble. "Ongoing, as part of my internal advisory structure." Celia looked at him. Advisory structure is a very clean phrase. "I run a number of businesses," he said. "Some of them are straightforward. Some require a more nuanced understanding of financial architecture." He said it without evasion, and she appreciated that more than she expected to. She had found in her career that the most dangerous people in any boardroom were the ones who pretended the gray areas didn't exist. "I need someone who can see what Martin Chu counted on no one seeing, someone who speaks the language." He paused. "Both languages." Celia was quiet for a moment. "I have a question," she said. "Ask it." "Last night, when you heard me on the phone," she looked at him directly, "when you understood that I'd heard everything in that room, most people in your position would have handled that situation very differently." "I considered it," Raphael said. The candor in it was, she suspected, unusual for him. And you turned around," he said, "and immediately told me you had found something in the books that I needed to know about." Before I said a single word, he held her gaze. "A woman who responds to a threat by producing useful intelligence is not a woman you handle, Miss Huang. She's a woman you listen to." Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Las Vegas burned gold in the midday sun. The desert beyond it was enormous and still and completely indifferent to everything happening inside this room. Celia thought about the bookkeepers, till she thought about every conference room she had walked into where someone had clocked her size, her face, the reading glasses lost on top of her head, and silently decided in the first 10 seconds that she was not going to be the most consequential person at the table. She thought about how long she had used that assumption as a working tool, sliding under it like a current, doing the work while nobody was watching carefully enough to see it. She thought about Martin Chu's face. "My rate is non-negotiable," she said. Something shifted in Raphael Tsang's eyes, not the neutral appraisal of the doorway, not the careful calculation of the long night, something more direct than either, a heat that was leashed but present and deliberate in letting her see it. "I wouldn't expect it to be," he said. The desert held its light outside the glass. Somewhere in Flushing, Queens, a 15-year-old girl had once done arithmetic on a napkin in a supply room and found exactly where the lie was hiding. She had never stopped looking. She had just finally found a room that was built to hold everything she brought into it.